Okay, good evening. Sorry for the little delay here. And this is going to be a somewhat abbreviated class tonight. So the parsha this week, the Torah portion this week, is the parsha of Toldot. And Toldot is the one and only Torah portion which is devoted to the life of Yitzchak, of the second of the patriarchs. And it's devoted to the life of Yitzchak and his wife Rivka, who plays probably the biggest role. I think I mentioned it a couple of weeks ago as the most daring and decisive of all of the matriarchs in terms of the relationship and the unfolding of events. Let's just, for a snapshot, go through the events of the Torah reading here. We ended last week's Torah reading where Rebecca came back to the land of Israel, met her husband to be Yitzchak, and they were married. The Torah continues now that after 20 years of marriage, they had no children. They prayed for a child. Rivka conceived, and she went through a very painful and distressing pregnancy where she originally felt that she must have a totally schizophrenic being within her who seems to be tremendously torn between good and evil. She seeks out the word of God and finds out that there in fact are two children, separate children within her. And she gets a vision for human history that these two are going to be rivals throughout history, which is a very, if you just imagine, put yourself in her shoes as a woman who's expecting for the first time and is so pleased to be able to be a matriarch in the upholding the legacy of Abraham and Sarah, but to find out that there are two competing children within her who will have an ultimate struggle for perseverance between the two of them. She gives birth. Esau is born first, then Yaakov is born. Their names have a lot of significance. We'll discuss it briefly. They grow up. The first 15 years of their life, they just grow up in parallel to each other. Very different. Yaakov is described as the dweller of tents, which means someone who is absorbed in study and learning and growth. And Esau is a man of the field, a conqueror, a hunter, a person who puts his stamp on the world around him by dominating it and subduing it. When they turn 15, and the age isn't explicit there, but it's sequenced with the passing of Abraham, Esau encounters his brother and says, "Give me some of the soup that you're cooking." And Yaakov says, "I'm happy to give it to you. I'll sell it to you for the right of your being the firstborn." And Esau responds in a very poignant way. "Lama li zeh b'chora." What do I need this first right? What do I need this spiritual legacy? And he gives it up to satisfy his hunger of the moment for a bowl of soup. And the Torah tells us that following that incident, Esau comes to despise the position of the firstborn. Then we have a narrative about Yitzchak going through a period of famine, going to the land of Gerar, encountering Avimelech. We have Yitzchak digging wells, and Isaac is the well digger of the Torah, even though Abraham did before him, but he redigs wells that were created by his father. And you'll find yeshivas named Be'er Yitzchak, the well of Isaac, because Isaac, in digging these wells, was reaffirming the whole legacy of his father to do good for the world and to be a source of good for the world. And then comes the high drama of the Torah portion, where Isaac feels his life is coming to an end. He wants to convey blessings. He wants to convey those blessings to Esau. Rivka intercedes, pulls off a ruse, which Jacob is the is the reluctantly goes along with it. The blessings end up given to Jacob. And then Esau ends by vowing to kill his brother because he's so upset with it. And Rebekah sends Jacob off to her hometown far away to her brother Lavan so that he could find a suitable wife. So that's an overview of the events. I think the timeline is, as I figured it out, is about 60, 75 years. I'm not sure exactly, or 80 years of the whole Torah portion. And we're not going to go into the details of the math. I titled this class Twins because I want to just make a point about twins. It's not an exciting, unbelievable point, but I think it's a point that, if you think about, has merit. And that is that twins are by nature pressed to various extents to define who they are in comparison to their fellow twin. They're sharing a womb and being born into the world together creates not necessarily a rivalry or a competition or a hatred, God forbid, or necessarily a special closeness, but it places in the mind, I think, of the parents and the twins themselves, of a sense of comparison. If you're a twin, it's hard to say, oh, I'm tall, if your twin is taller than you, even though you may well be tall in your own right. So I just want to take this concept a little bit. And we know by Jewish tradition that in conceptual terms, Jacob represents the legacy of Abraham and Isaac and the Jewish people. And we call ourselves B'nai Yisrael, the children of Israel, after his name that he'll eventually receive. We're all descendants of Jacob. Esau is deemed to be the progenitor of Rome and the Roman Empire, which by Jewish tradition were the destroyers, by historical fact, were the destroyers of the Second Temple. And by Jewish conceptual tradition, this long 2,000-year exile and oppression of the Jewish people all happens at the hands of Esau. So the question is this: why would God choose, or why was it ordained by God that the third pillar of the Jewish people would come into this world as a twin, facing a twin who in many ways is his diametric opposite? If you want to stereotype them, you could call it good and evil, although those are not perfectly good descriptions of either of the two of them. Why would God do this? And I would just, if this question makes sense to anyone, I would welcome you to unmute yourself and offer a thought or two here, just so we can try to get on the same page in terms of what the concept of this class is. Would anybody like to offer a theory or an idea of why this was not true for Abraham? He came into a world as a single person, iconoclastic person who was ready to destroy, break the idols of the time and find his own way. Yitzchak is the devoted person who wants to live in the world in purity. And Jacob comes into this world face to face with severe opposition and challenge right from the get-go. Anybody want to venture forward a thought as to why perhaps God has the events unfolding the way he does? Please. Let's have some bravery here. Right. So I want to, I'm in the face of deafening silence. I just want to offer a concept and an overview. And this was a class I worked on and thought about for a while. It honestly hasn't gelled. And so, but I want to just put forward this idea. And I'll use an analogy. For argument's sake, let's say I have a child and I want him to be, my greatest aspiration for my child is that he become the world's best soccer player. So what do? I take him out on the soccer field. He's a little kid, teach him to kick around the ball. He practices, he kicks the ball, becomes adept at kicking with both feet, moving up and down the field, kicking into the goal. He's a happy little kid. He enjoys doing that. He enjoys seeing his father deriving pleasure from that. Everything is very fine. Is that the pathway for him to become a great soccer player? And the obvious answer is no, because until opponents get on the field with him and challenge him, and every time he tries to advance the ball, somebody rushes into his face to steal it from him. And every time he tries to kick a goal, there's a goalie there to block it. There's no way on earth he could possibly develop into an adept, accomplished player. So what you see so clearly here is this, that greatness is forged through challenge. You know, it would be like if I got the opportunity to compete for the World Heavyweight Championship. So they gave me a choice and said, well, who do you want to spar against? And I said, well, I want to spar against the wimpiest, easiest boxers because I want to build up my own self-esteem and I don't like getting punched back. So that would be great. I could train one after the other for months at a time. And clearly when I would get into the ring, filled with my own self-confidence, not having a mark on my body, not a sore rib, I would clearly lose because there's no way I have within me the experience of facing up to a challenger who is strong and powerful. So I want to just put this out there, that since Jacob, the third of the patriarchs, together with his wives, are meant to launch the Jewish people, the Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, all the way through history, he and his family needed to be able to stand up to any possible challenge that could be mounted against him. And the concept is that in God's wisdom, God ordained that literally from the moment of conception and even within the womb of his mother, this challenge and this sense of opposition would be with him and facing him from then and all the way through his life. And of course, we're going to know from the stories, it's not only Esau, his twin, who opposes him, but then he takes on his father-in-law, Lavan. And we say in the Haggadah that Lavan was even more aimed at destruction of the Jewish people than was Pharaoh when he oppressed the Jewish people for 400 years in Egypt. So we see this sense that clearly the whole story of Yaakov is laced with the idea that for Yaakov to fulfill his role in launching the Jewish people on what proves to be a 3,500-year odyssey through human history, to uphold the principles of Judaism and to bring light to the world, the only way that that could be launched and it could be accomplished was not just through the 10 tests that Abraham faced, which were very formidable, not just through the sheltering life of a Yitzchak who built tremendous strength within himself, which we also rely on, but through the sense of a Jacob that God is challenging me in order for me to become great and in order for me to persevere. And in a certain sense, in order for us, the Jewish people, to realize that opposition to good invariably stands taller, bigger, stronger, more powerful than does good itself. And yet good perseveres. And I would just point out the English saying, the pen is mightier than the sword. Now, the pen is not stronger, it's not longer, it's not bigger, it's not heavier. But the concept is, we express it in Hebrew more in the sense that good is expressed in a kol dimama daka, a quiet, still voice of consistency and upholding what's good. And opposition to that voice oftentimes is much louder, more powerful, more flashy, more enticing. And that's the way God built the world. And the anomaly of what the Jewish people need to represent is a confidence that our quiet, pure voices will stand the test of not being drowned out or overwhelmed or crushed in the face of opposition that is stronger and more powerful. And this is the last part I wanted to, and more vehement. Because as we grow up and develop as people, I think we see within ourselves that we have a certain enjoyment of doing good. You know, if my mother needs something, it gives me great pleasure to help her and to bring that to her and to see her, to uphold the fact that I'm indebted to you, I admire you, you're my mother, you've done so much good for me, it's my pleasure to repay you. But even within ourselves, we realize that if we well up with anger, there's a much stronger passion to it. It speaks much more comprehensively within us. It drives us to a greater extent. So even on a personal level, just looking within ourselves, it's easy for any of us to come to the conclusion that, get real, you want to be a good person? Who are you kidding? When you become angry, or when someone provokes jealousy, or when someone embarrasses you, your feeling to take revenge and right this wrong is so much more intense and so much more encompassing than is that quiet feeling I have, well, wouldn't it be a nice thing for me to do a mitzvah right now? Wouldn't it be a great thing for me to help my wife? Wouldn't it be a great thing for me to spend time with my child, getting to understand him or her better, and deepening my communication with that child for the sake of both of us, for the sake of humanity? But we know that the urge and the passion seems to be much stronger when the motivation is coming from the side of the equation that Esav represents. So there's a big lesson here. The big lesson is this, and we hear this all the time, you know, you hear it with children, but you hear it just as much in adults. If God didn't want me to be angry, he wouldn't have made me angry. Or how do you expect me to control my wrath when someone has wronged me? And I'm going to follow this down whatever path it takes me. So there's a big lesson here. The big lesson is this, and we, the Jewish people, need to have ingrained within us the conviction that a single match up against pitch blackness will ultimately persevere and bring light into the world. And even though the blackness seems to go on forever, and the light of the match seems to illuminate only a very small area and only for a limited period of time, this is the conviction that the Jewish people is built on. And I just want to play this out on just one more level from this week's Parsha, and that'll be it for this elevated class. The business with the blessings. We've discussed in years past here, but it's just a very straightforward idea. I can't really steal a blessing from somebody else, right? If my next door neighbor is bestowing something on his child, if I dress up as his child and stand in front of him and he thinks I'm somebody else, why is he possibly blessing me? So what we have to understand there is the following idea, and it fits in with this first idea. It was clear to Yitzchak, to Isaac, that the Jewish people could only be sustained through history if they were somehow forever linked to the power and might of an Esav. That's what Yitzchak foresaw. And that was his conviction. And although he may have been fooled and he didn't understand Esav as well as his wife Rebecca did, he came to the table with the idea, I've had these two twin boys. They weren't boys anymore at this point, they were older men. But I don't see a Jacob persevering and carrying on the legacy of Abraham and Isaac unless I can somehow wed his future to the strength and power and impressiveness of an Esav. So I'm going to have to bestow blessings upon Esav, which will somehow connect him to the purely spiritual mission, which Jacob clearly represents. And that's the only way that Judaism will have a chance. And Rebecca, who had given birth to these twins and who had suffered all the pain and anguish of that pregnancy, and certainly the beginning stages when she couldn't understand that there were two different empires and two different philosophies and two different pathways in life within her. How could that be? Until she understood that they were two distinct people. Rivka could see the situation clearly enough to realize that, yeah, Jacob is the dweller of tents. He has the depth of connection to the legacy of Abraham and his father Isaac, which is unshakable. And that will sustain the good and the influence and the impact of Abraham and Isaac throughout history without the bravado and the physical prowess and the force that Esav would add. Because ultimately what Esav would be adding with those dimensions of power and force would be the conviction that this is what dominates the world and not that. And Rivka could understand that a Jacob could persevere through history on his own 2 feet. And in fact, being connected to the personage of an Esav, it would prove to be unsustainable because the goodness itself would erode from within and it wouldn't be sustained. And the amazing moment in the Torah portion is as follows. When Esav comes in after Isaac bestows the blessings on Jacob, and it's clear that he has given the blessings to the wrong person, or it's clear that he has bestowed these blessings upon Jacob, not in conjunction of joining him with the future legacy of an Esau. At that moment, Isaac's eyes are opened metaphorically, and he says the words, V'gam baruch tihiyeh, let Jacob be blessed. And that clarity, in other words, all the machinations of the costuming and the coming in before Esav could come in, and defying the vision for the future that Isaac felt would sustain the Jewish people by Rivka unmasking the error of thinking as though that this union would sustain good in the world. When all was said and done, and when Jacob had departed from in front of him and Esav stood in front of him, and Isaac came to grips with the idea that all the blessings had been conveyed to Jacob, albeit by mistake, then Isaac confirms it and says, V'gam baruch tiyeh. Now I see that within the goodness of a Jacob alone is all the strength, all the fortitude that is necessary to carry the Jewish people through history. And this is a tremendous challenge to us, like I say, in our own lives. You know, when you're a teenager and you feel overwhelmed by passionate feelings that you never even have experienced before, you know, and you see it all the time, you know, when you see an 11, 12, 13-year-old become angry, and it's almost like they're feeling like, wow, I'm really angry. I've never felt like this before in my life. I really feel like killing that other person for pushing me when I was about to score the winning basket during recess time. And you see such immense energy and passion and conviction come to the fore. And I can tell you don't see that when you're challenging them to understand a few lines of Gemara. That doesn't come to the fore in that way. All those moments make us doubt and think, wow, somehow I need to tap into this quote unquote evil source of energy and passion and drive if good is going to persevere. And those are the moments when we're cautioned by this week's Torah portion to say, it doesn't work that way. because the annals of human history are replete with people who, with good intentions and pure motivation, become corrupted once they acquire power, once they acquire wealth, once they acquire dominance over other people. How demoralizing those qualities can be. And hence, it requires a person of the most refined character to be able to wield authority and grandeur and power, but remain true to the idea that it's only the good within me that is going to carry me through. And I just want to say the ultimate example of that in Jewish history is David. And that's why we refer to David as David Melech Yisrael. King David is the perpetual king of the Jewish people, because he is singularly the personage who unexpectedly was anointed by Samuel to become the king of the Jewish people. And you just have to look at the story, you know, when Samuel came to the house of his father and said, there's a king here, I need to anoint him. They went through all the other children in the family, and they didn't even bother bringing David in from the field because everybody knew it's not him. Why? Because he was the embodiment of the simplicity of a Jacob. And when you put a crown on his head, he was able to lead armies into battle. He was able to stand with a slingshot against the most powerful forces on earth with complete trust in God. And he stayed true to the conviction that goodness and purity triumph and persevere and prevail without resorting to any compromise or any liaison with evil and a sense of the need, the drive to just dominate and take control. And that's the way I see the threads of the whole Parsha. I think if we think about this theme and we look through this Parsha with the pregnancy of Rebekah and the events in Isaac's life of digging the wells and the confrontations between Jacob and his brother Esau, I think we will see that the whole Parsha is built on this notion of at what point do we sell out to the notion of power and might and give ground on the notions of purity, sanctity, and goodness. And somehow the answer has to be that if we really want to persevere, if we really want this to continue through history, if we really want to sustain the movement of Judaism that was begun in the tents of Abraham and Sarah with their kindness and their compassion and their uplift to all other human beings and the respect for the dignity of every human being, then we have to keep ourselves bedrocked on this notion of staying in the tents of Jacob, of drawing our wisdom from the Torah, and realizing that forces against us often, if not always, seem very powerful, very overwhelming. We're never going to get the odds makers of Las Vegas to choose us as the favorite. But in the end of the day, we'll be carrying forward the legacy of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, while the other forces of nature dissipate and disappear. And I just wanted to share that framework on the Parsha. Usually I give more examples, and I'm sorry, in the interest of time, because of a constraint I have, I'm going to have to end the class soon. But I would welcome any comments or any questions, because I don't want to give a class and not have someone who wants to ask a question be able to ask a question. So if anyone does have a question, please unmute yourself and ask it, and I'm happy to address it the best way I can. Okay. Somehow the mute system is working very well here. I'll have to, but anyway, I want to thank everybody for participating and joining. If you do have something you do want to say, I mean, we'll give everybody another moment. But I appreciate you being here tonight.
Rabbi, I think Pat is trying to unmute herself.
Right, I'm trying to do the same thing. I'm trying to unmute.
No, I just wanted to say thank you very much, Rabbi. That's all.
Okay, no, thank you very much for being here. And we'll give this more thought, and usually I do go through the
Thank
idea
you, Rabbi.
carefully, but for tonight, I think this will have to do it. Everyone should have a great evening and a great week. Thank you very much.
Thank you, you
Thank
too.
you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Amen to you as
you.
well.
Thank you.
And Mazel Tov and your grandson.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I have my grandson. Thank
Rabbi
you
Weiser,
very much.
Weiser.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.